January 4th, 1987, along the high-speed rail passenger line near the town of Chase, Maryland, a few miles north of Baltimore. The Amtrak Colonial is heading north. The Colonial is a 12-car train carrying about 700 passengers from Washington to Boston. The speeding train rounds a blind corner. Directly in front of him, the engineer sees a Conrail freight locomotive on the same track. He slams on the brakes, but it's too late. Firefighters found a gruesome scene. Mangled metal, severely wounded passengers, and chaos.
And once we got there, there were walking wounded people with lacerations on their face. Before we even got out, they were like grabbing us and everything.
Firefighters quickly hosed down the area to prevent a fire and began searching through the wreckage for survivors.
One of the things that I vividly remember, and it stuck with me for a very long time, and had a little bit of trouble dealing with it when we first went in some of the cars. We could hear people moaning, screaming, "Get me out." I myself could feel people grabbing onto me, onto my legs especially.
The sheer weight and density of the crushed cars made the jaws of life, a device commonly used to free victims in automobile accidents, useless.
A train presents a unique challenge. Most of our rescue tools, our tactics, our techniques are practiced for the events we see most often, automobile crashes, dwelling fires, and things like that. So a train brings a different kind of occupancy. It brings a lot of casualties that can really overtax the system quite quickly, and that's exactly what happened on the day of the crash.
The arrangement of the crushed wreckage made it very hard to reach the trapped victims. Using airbags, sandbags, and jacks, rescue crews were able to brace the mangled cars.
We had to use ladders to move equipment up and down to get the people out. We had to put them in what we call Stokes baskets, like a wire stretcher, and use ropes to lower the people down because there was no other way to do it.
Animation reveals how the trains collided. The Conrail locomotive went through a signal warning it to stop and moved onto the same tracks as the Amtrak train. The passenger train couldn't avoid ramming the Conrail engines from behind. The rear cars plowed forward, shoving the other cars off the track in a zigzag chain reaction. The Amtrak locomotive ended up sandwiched between the Conrail train and a stack of passenger coaches. Estimated energy released in the collision was equivalent to the explosive force of 320 pounds of TNT, an amount of explosives that would destroy a city block.
It was clear when we looked at the scene that this was a tremendous impact where speed was involved, just because of the amount of destruction done to the train itself. I was just absolutely amazed that something this big could be reduced to this pile of rubble.
Within half an hour of the initial call, doctors specially trained for on-site medical care were flown in by helicopter to treat the most seriously injured. Other victims were rushed by ambulance to a local warehouse where a temporary triage was set up. Over 1,000 rescue personnel responded to the accident. As the day wore on, crews struggled to extract 5 people still trapped in the wreckage. It took more than 24 hours to free the last victim. Unfortunately, many other passengers died before they could be rescued.
They were somewhat confused as their injuries were starting to get the better of them, but you could see them again slipping away right in front of you, and nothing you could do. There came a point of frustration where we just started pulling desperately on some of them to get them out, because we knew that if we couldn't get them out now, it was going to be lost. And I watched at least 2 people take their last breath right in front of me, and it's something you can't describe. When you talk to them and you see them and you promise them you're going to get them out.
16 people died and more than 170 were injured in the collision. In the days following the disaster, a federal investigation revealed the Conrail engineer had sped through 2 caution signals, warning him to slow down and prepare to stop. In addition, both trains had been speeding. The Amtrak passenger train was traveling at 128 miles an hour, well in excess of the 105-mile-an-hour speed limit. The Conrail freight locomotives were traveling at over 60 miles an hour, even though a signal had warned the crew to slow down to 15 miles an hour. Furthermore, blood and urine tests revealed that both the freight engineer and brakeman had traces of marijuana in their systems. The Conrail engineer, Ricky Gates, was later convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 5 years in prison.
Because I was the engineer of the Conrail engine 5044, I am ultimately responsible not only for my own negligence, but also for the conduct of Conrail, Amtrak, and Butch Cromwell. I have accepted my responsibility by pleading guilty today.
It was the first indictment and conviction of a locomotive engineer for manslaughter in the state of Maryland. As a result of the accident, federal legislation now requires random drug testing of employees in safety-related positions, including railway engineers. In addition, Conrail equipped all of its trains along the Northeast Corridor with automatic braking devices that will mechanically stop a train if an engineer fails to respond to a warning signal. Memories of the gruesome scene have stayed with many of the rescue personnel.
I'd have nightmares, wake up in the middle of the night, and people just grabbing you. You know, you just get that sensation, and that's took me a while to shake that.
And for me, it's clear. Amtrak, the crash, the scene, the memories that I have, I'll carry with me forever, and it always comes to mind when people say, what's the worst thing you've ever seen?
The collision in Chase, Maryland involved conventional locomotives and cars, known as heavy rail. But slicing through the transit arteries of the major cities in the world runs another type of rail system. It's called a subway.